So this presentation, I've called it Ode to Fog. And I want to say that the images you will be seeing are in French, but they are information about the project itself. But the text is in English, and I can respond also in French if need be to some questions. I want to start by a poem by a Moroccan writer called Tahar Ben Jelloun, who some of you may know, in a book that was published in 2004 called Maroc, les montagnes du silence. Cette brume est la voile du silence, blanche comme la solitude des monts, nue, insidieuse. Tel le soleil se cachant dans les arbres, elle rend floues les montagnes et les visages. Dans cette terre à la dureté âpre et naturelle, tout est écrit, rien n'est ni lisible. Seuls les enterrés du jour gardent les yeux ouverts. Introduction. Without ever failing, and every single time I hear back a what? When I say that I lead and manage a project that provides water out of fog to meet all the water needs of this one mountain community. This what is an interpellation, half incredulous, half inquisitive, which finds its roots in a genealogy for the ordering of the world and its material categories, to which as humans have ascribed a set of associations and a range of uses. A naturalness that defines where things originate, how they function, how we humans expect to put them to use. The arresting what of fog as a source of water is a disordering of the evident, natural and accepted order. It is a questioning of the space of the possible. In this paper, I'd like to engage in what philosopher Karine Barad, but she's also a physicist, identifies as a quote, an analysis that enables us to theorize the social and the natural together, to read our best understanding of social and natural phenomena through one another in a way that clarifies the relationship between them. End of quote. Considering this fog as a natural phenomenon, its unnaturalness as a resource within the social constructs and ontological realities, then taking a development initiative with fog as its central axis in order to locate those entanglements, to construct understandings, but also connections in what I believe is a post-humanist setting, one in which human is not and should absolutely not be the measure of all things. This immaterial matter of fog is assigned a meaning, given a voice, at times even agency, among the Amazigh or Berber communities where the fog project is located. From their pre-project worldview to post-project, their definition of fog has adjusted to shifting political and social forces of development, a re-articulation of function and an assignment of positive value heretofore lacking. We talk about the project of fog harvesting in the anti-Atlas Mountains of southwest Morocco, in which fog, this immaterial, has become all of a sudden an asset, creating the imminent danger for fog to be in mainstream simply into yet another resource in this age of the Anthropocene. But at the same time, fog has created new conditions of hope that have translated into the possibility for community members to remain in their ancestral land instead of migrating to harsh and often demeaning urban environments. This is the tension that inhabits this paper, this project, and the use value assigned to fog, and one that I'd like to revisit in my conclusion. For the last decade, I have been working on fog collection, development initiatives, and environmental education in a small NGO in southwest Morocco. But I have also fallen in love with fog and fog aesthetics. I try very hard to focus and work on the linkages that connect these elements in more ways than the obvious ones, more in the poetics than in the simple poesis. That is, I ask the questions of how these elements coalesce and live in this era of the great derangements, as the writer Amitav Ghosh would call it. At times, my questions are simply pushed to the side to make room for more immediate pragmatics of affecting change in the world, as all the NGO folks know. But they have also been the assured path for understanding the assumptions of what naturalness is and developments, as I hope to make clear in this presentation. Ultimately, they have led me to thinking about a moral economy towards our planet, of our obligation towards other forms of sentient beings and sentient phenomenon, an ethical concern not merely as a supplemental annex in affecting change, but an absolutely integral component to the making of any project. Not all fog is the same. Climatologists distinguish between 6 different types of this phenomena: sea fog, advection fog, radiation fog, mountain fog, valley fog, and stream fog. I want to show you some of the types of fog. Each one of these types appears under a set of natural conditions, feeds a given ecosystem, and produces a number of effects. Sea and advection fog, also generally referred to as coastal fog, are not exploited as a resource because they are too thin, though it is important to note that this is the most prevalent form of fog on our planet. At this moment in the history of fog collection, it is only mountain and valley fog that are easily harvested due to their consistency. They are thick and dense with molecules holding enough water, making the likelihood each one being caught in the nets quite high. This type of fog is prevalent in large sections of the planet in the North Cancer and the South Capricorn tropics, with what is known also as fog seas. So some of the types of fog. D'évaporation, and these are the currents that actually create fog. And I leave you at this image here. Fog is produced by airflow between masses of hot and cold air, a movement between the cold currents, the anticyclones, and the wind. Natural conditions that work in concert, like clockwork, that produce these vapors that then move like a dance with the able hand of the wind. Long corridors, passages in which they move until they meet an elevation where it just sits, where it just is. These are the ideal places where anthropologically and historically humans have collected fog waters, from the Canary Island past the Kalahari Desert, the Arabic Peninsula, or the Atacama Deserts. But beyond the detailed revelation of science, the demystification of fog, there is yet another poetics to fog. There is, as French anthropologist Philippe Descola would argue, that, quote, nature has always resulted from human perception, and how modern naturalism is not a transcendental truth, but is only one way of comprehending the world. And here I invite you then to share this other way of comprehending fog, that is that of my community and my own. On the top of the Boutmezguida mountain, at 1,225 meters of altitude, fog is known to come at either early morning or late night. Symbolically and in human conceptions, these moments send us to cycles of beginnings and endings, times of birth and death, connections and separations. There are also those moments in which, beyond simple binaries, the sacred secrets of life with its mystical dimension, that which goes beyond the telos, moments of great mystery and so much power, are known to occur. Compounded to these thresholds, the specific mountain itself, Boutmezguida, named the mosque, a proto-sacred place, adds yet another layer to this mystical force. Ancient and ancestral rituals used to be practiced in this space, when men undertook the hard climb, a pilgrimage to offer sacrificial beasts, asking the powers that be, mostly for rain. In sensorial reality, and when one is standing in this sacrificial ground, witnessing fog rolling its waves, spreading its thickness and density, an immaterial that has a material mass, very slowly filling the emptiness, there is a cold dampness that comes along. With a very delicate tempo, gracious drapes of white fill the space, turning the sharp, defined landscape of brown and different shades of green slowly into fuzzy, then unclear images, to then disappear entirely from one's vision. There is all of a sudden no landscape and no story to tell but the realm of silence, or perhaps a newfound ground for introspection and connection to nurture. There is for me a sort of haunting aesthetics of fog, that the tiny floating water particles create an impressionist painting, but it is one that albeit alive and moving. When, say, a towering minaret from afar looming large with no base, or that a tree seeming as just a pencil-drawn contour of a Chinese painting, or that a human silhouette slowly fades into the vanishing point. And no, these are not simply cinematic montage, but an environmental reality that, for one, surely explains their overuse as elements of decor in films with intention of creator or further enhancing mystery and clarity and sometimes fear. Because of its transient nature, its irregularity and predictability, and I can tell you that within 8 years of fog collection in Morocco, July has moved as a month from 0 fog events to one of the most productive months in 2015, and then once again intermittent. Fog somehow engenders a need to cower, to retrieve, but not in the same way we would run from a sudden pour, a flash flood, or an unforgivingly scorching hot sun. There is a sort of connection to some primal force of fear from it as an object, from what this opaqueness and silence might obstruct to the visual eye and reveal to the internal eye. This fear, again, is not related so only to what might be actual physical danger lurking, as in the anti-Atlas mountains with wild boars and some rare instances of foxes, but what might be non-material entities. The women of this region speak about being trapped, caught into fog, with an impossibility to protect oneself from what could be maleficent entities living and thriving within it. Other forms of life, the spirits and the jinns. Once existing and breathing in a thick fog event, one is in a state of blur. There is an obvious loss of visual referencing, and it is in part this inescapability from the heaviness, the opaqueness, the dampness that the women believe makes them vulnerable of becoming prey as they disturb the living space and tranquility of those other worlds and entities. The women also believe that despite inherently fearing and disliking fog for real reasons, of which I will discuss later, they still endow it with some positive feedback. Fog significantly cools the heat and dampens vegetation with its gentle touch. Subtle, fog cannot be spectacularly destructive the way a torrential rain could or an extremely mighty windstorm. There is intrinsically a gentleness and calm attributed to the element of fog. In a landscape of extremes and of rough conditions, fog emerges as a soothing and comforting element. The intelligibility of fog is further enriched now by this one other component usually not associated with it, sound. Our organization has welcomed experimental installation to collect the sound of fog in Boutmezguida. We've called it the Rhizome Project. The project name Fog Rhizomes is building on a previous experiment. Listen to the sound of the melting Weihnachtferner glaciers in Austria by a German artist called Atlis Kaller, who has installed a sound box on top of the cloud fissures. This sort of unique design instrument, a wind resonating tube, which tracks, listens, and records the local atmosphere with its many variations, of which fog is a major player. As a part of the emerging environmentally based art, we are organizing a fog art residency this coming August, in which Kaller and other renowned local artists, of which Rais Belmudden, rebab player, and the rebab is a very local instrument, and others will engage into a sound creation in which this living landscape is not only an inspiration, and I insist on that, but a major interlocutor, recording audio jousts between rebab and fog, the immaterial material turning into sound. We are hoping to share through such experiments our belief in how fully sentient fog is. Now I will speak about the project. The southwest region of Morocco, at the sloping end of the anti-Atlas mountain range, with the highest peak, Toile, at 1,300 meters of altitude, Environmental conditions are harsh and now the theater of extreme weather events, from the torrential flash floods as in 2014 to heat attaining 52 degrees Celsius recorded actually last summer in August 2018. Barely sufficient rain has always come every other year in the Sahara bordering region, as attested by some 60 years of meteorological data as well as living memory of the population. But since the famous and extended drought of 1986, the onset cycles of droughts have increased in intensity and frequency. And today, the average rainfall is down to 108 millimeters every couple of years. The community knows that such precipitation is far from enough to recharge deep aquifers, fill their cisterns, or water their barley. Then on top of this, there comes the high Shergay winds, hot gale blowing from the Sahara that further dries this water-scarce environment, causes serious dehydration, brings desert sand, and causes topsoil erosion. But in these mountains, it is in these mountains that 5 to 6 months of the year, thick fog drapes the region. Its humidity, watering arrogant trees, forests with growth of lichen, I don't know how to say it in English, on trunks and twigs, slowly cooling the weather like a gentle, soothing touch. But it is no source of water. Albeit this landscape of the region has been worked and transformed by human hands, adapted for a living and thriving culture. This is where we have the project. The rugged earth red with scattered cacti like euphorbia, large expanses of prickly pear, and the famous Argana spinosa trees, all water-wise vegetation are exploited as livelihood resources. The villages used to merge entirely with the mountain flanks at the local abandoned red rocks were employed to build large and weather-adapted houses, but some are today using cement and mortar, imprinting this once seamless landscape with the elements of modernity. In this large region constituted by some 380 villages distributed across 8 rural counties of the Ais Ba'amran, Amazigh, Berber tribes, there are no expansive agricultural valleys, but mostly terracing, of which a visitor today will only see vestiges as this agricultural particularity has been largely abandoned. These Amazigh Ais Ba'amran communities, known in the annals of Moroccan official history as the proud and staunch fighters from the 16th century against the Atlantic incursions of Spain and Portugal, and then in the early 20th century as the soldiers to have helped the colonizing Spanish nationalists win their civil war, have certainly acclimated to such a harsh and demanding mountain environment. Though an extremely important element in the construction of the Ais Ba'amran social identity, they tend to comment today, not without some dose of sarcasm, that such valor and might is now mostly oriented to eking out a living. There are silver pastoralists who have a special affection to their livestock, mostly composed of goats, some sheep, cows, plus the domestic chicken, donkeys, cats, and few dogs. Herding is a traditionally female occupation. There are also apiculturalists producing medicinal honey, but having today to drive further west in search of flowers and water, especially when high temperature or fog threaten the very life of the bees. Today, and according to National Moroccan Census of 2014, the 115,691 inhabitants make a sparsely populated region with very low density. The change within the household constitution, moving towards nuclear family models, is indicative of deep structural changes within the region. Women, children, and the elderly are the majority full-time resident population, with a young to middle-aged male population living outside, doing mostly low-wage menial jobs, and migrant labor in mass sending remittances so that families and culture live on. Women fulfilling the task of biological and cultural reproduction, guardians and transmitters of language, traditions, and practices, have highly demanding lives. Hauling water home, shepherding the animals, completing domestic chores, tending to each and every individual in the large family, children, parents, parents-in-law, neighbors, and visitors. In a base study conducted with 8 villages prior to building the fog project in the summer of 2011, the women spoke at length about their lives in relation to water. They recalled the arguments and fights that sometimes oppose villagers when extreme water scarcity in the dry season pits them against each other. The women, these moments left scars in the communal memory of the villages. In addition to social policing and strict moral codes, they described continuing hardships, fears, and their daily struggle with highly demanding environments, especially the water chore that occupies a significant part of the day, an average of 3.5 hours daily. Some reported how they felt in a state of perpetual thirst when during the peak of the dry season, in cycles of drought, they would, quote, and this is a quote, would not sleep, would go at 3 or 4 a.m. together and stand by the well so that the turn taken at the well be respected. And enough time is allocated so that the water table rises. And then, or how, quote, how the elderly children, or how once back with little amounts of water, we need to prioritize. We will go thirsty, but give to the elderly, to the children, but also to the animals. The women spoke at length about how the anxiety of this water scarcity, as it had repercussions on themselves and their social identity as guardians, protectors. Some felt they failed their role when they had to sell their animals, driving them further into cycles of poverty, in addition to such a decision being emotionally very hard and a hard choice. In this base study, we identified the women as living in a state of water anxiety with less than 7 liters per person per day, which is the threshold the World Health Organization identifies. This study coincided with a significant number of households getting a TV, as an Amazigh-speaking TV station was officially launched in January 2010. The villages had been connected to electricity only some 3 years prior. And images of the outside world, of cities and towns, of different social realities had become part of the women's vocabulary and mental worlds. Water abundance, as seen in multiple TV programs or as boasted by visiting urban-based family members, was constructed as a basic and profound affront to their dignity because of their inability to access even a minima of this vital resource. The women felt and lived the extreme water scarcity of the dry season as an embodiment of human injustice, but not a divine injustice, that should be addressed by the state, the makhzan. Women agreed with elder women from a village, Timtda, how, quote, no one cares about our suffering, no one hears us, and that as the Amazigh, plural of Amazigh, in the mountains don't really count, end of quote. This deep frustration of the women about the lack of interest and impotence of the central power to meet the needs of the population is a shared sentiment among the population. Each village within this province has an active association, the correlation being that rural-based associations are therefore born out of necessity to counter not only this sense of neglect and indifference towards rural needs, but as the enactment of a political agency, a decision to somehow affect change, to have a different outcome for accessing services as water, health, or education. The women are very aware of the opening associations and cooperatives represented and are aware of the organization that I represent's organic connection to the region, our president being a returning enfant prodige from an illustrious local family. So all the team members were welcomed to the households where we presented our plans of the fog harvesting initiative. As a justification for our survey, we spoke about successful fog experiments in Chile, in Tenerife, and about the TV operators on the top of Boutmesguida, the place where we have the projects, placing buckets at the base of the pillars to collect water they reserved for their sanitation purposes, as they had themselves explained to us. We were met with blank stares, with ridicule and sarcasm. It seems as though we were simply further digging the knife in an open wound, adding insult to injury. How could fog, a largely negative phenomenon, dangerous, sporadic, insignificant, and weak, be a solution to a serious community large water scarcity? For the women, fog is a major troublemaker for one's livelihood. It causes rust to agricultural equipment. It provides cover to fox and that attack livestock. It makes bees' wings heavy and able to fly. For women, fog makes life hard when plastic sandals are lost in damp, slick mountainsides, or when it prevents clothes from properly drying, which gives skin itching and then further causes breathing problems. For the women, fog's humidity is believed to cross the boundaries of the flesh to seat itself in the marrow of the bones as a myth, one that hurts and then one disables one's body. A dampness close to ailment, a harbinger for lack of rain, and a heaviness too hard to bear. It is often dismissed as an annoyance. For the women, and because of its elusive nature, fog has come to stand figuratively for mental blur, things of equivocal nature and of uncertainty. And here we are, after this long reverse list, claiming this nothing, fog, is the solution for water and for life. So for the women, profoundly disappointing moments, hard and very awkward for us, especially after the telling of the suffering. What we offered was simply out of bound. Trust seemed an impossible horizon in June 2011. I'm going to give you just some images here. For the subsequent 5 years, the organization I had, and with the support of a large number of partners, funders, dreamers, idealists, volunteers, opportunists, working against destroyers, skeptics, Kafkaesque bureaucratic processes, general apathy, scorn and resisting giving up as we were the laughingstock, and slowly, with determination, we erected on top of Mutmesgida first 800 square meters of fog collectors and then upgraded to the next generation cloud fishers with 31 units totaling 1,695 square meters of netting. Despite a dangerous and strenuous mountainside road, extremely challenging logistics, laying pipe in pre-Cambrian mountain, hand digging with axe and chisel, working in extreme weather conditions, we were able to connect 15 villages to fog water, delivered via gravity to each and every 119 households, plus 4 schools, 3 mosques. Today, an average of 18 tons of fog water mixed with underground water is delivered to everyone. Following an impact study that we completed in this past December 2018, the transformation within each village, each household, and among the women has been profound and radical. Of course, improved overall life quality, sanitation, health, time management, social peace. All those interviews spoke at length of the pride and specialness of being the depository of such a unique initiative. Documentaries about the projects, their own voices and stories have made it to national TV, which then circled back, streaming into their own living rooms. The meaning of fog has shifted from a burden to being an asset, from a negative natural phenomena to a positive one, perpetuating the virtuous cycle of life because it is the source of the generative substance of water. The shift of cultural beliefs around fog has been profound. The long grievance list evoked earlier replaced by praise and gratitude, as though this is a sudden discovery that has revealed realities not seen or experienced before. The community's trust was restored in the organization as water flowed, and this begs the question then who owns all of a sudden this newly redefined category that is fog? That is the materializing of a different reality born within what I have called earlier the space of the possible. That is in this process of illuminating the natural with the social, as Barad invites us to do, what types of connections are there to think through? With such a process of transformation, fog becomes a political entity, as it is subject to competing claims. The desire to express and enact agency and power over fog, the resource, has begun when during the last local elections in 2018, some two candidates of opposing political parties claimed that it is them who brought the new fog initiative to long-forgotten villages. It is easy to dismiss this as a simple political ploy, but it has alerted us as an organization to an added entanglement, a supplemental tension to consider the ownership claims of this entity that's called fog. Not that I have answers here about some legislative sense of ownership, but that this is an added tension, again, to what is becoming right now a long list. Project impacts are beyond quantitative analysis. As an NGO, funders require of us to represent quantifiable data of positive change and improvement. I have come to believe that there is some virtue in measuring how much time women have regained in their day, how many men have returned home, how many girls have stayed at school, or even how many schools have remained open. For a financing source, these are the means and the proof of the transformation that has occurred. There are, however, other stories to tell beyond the numbers, and here I have selected two to tell you. A month ago, a water pipe was damaged as a contractor digging to pave the new state-commissioned road damaged a pipe. For the first week, this one village of some 7 households, circa 45 people plus livestock, always count livestock, had sufficient water stored in their individual ancient cisterns. But once this water was all consumed, frantic calls were made to the organization, which was, even prior to the calls, already in discussion about whose responsibility it is to repair. Following this event, this one lady, speaking on behalf of some others, confided how, quote, they knew no more how to fetch water. And for one to add, we were standing there with our buckets outside of our homes with no idea what to do next, end of quote. Agnihia village was the first village to be connected to the fog shed because located at the furthest point from the mountaintop at some 17 kilometers. Since March 2015, water has been flowing into the homes, and this incident is a water cut not only in the resource, but profound rupture in a body of practices and knowledge. Standing and not knowing what to do for women who, for their entire lives in the village, have been the water guardians, have been the ones generating and nurturing the virtuous cycle of life at the base of which is water. Standing and not knowing, surveying an all too intimate landscape for a direction or a reference, and yet not knowing what to do next or where to orient themselves. I have been thinking a lot about the meaning to attribute to this sense of loss here. The women spoke about, and about questioning the memory of the water chore. These women who, a mere 4 years back, took 1, at times 2, even 3 trips to the well to bring their daily water needs, who have since an early age walked or rid on top of donkeys and mules with their mothers, cousins, aunts, or neighbors to fetch water. Now, holding a bucket and being lost articulates an expression of being severed, cut from what has been flowing inside the household, a breaking of and into a pattern that invites one to think about how we are beings of habit. I'm happy to report that we have fixed the breakage, but for me the question remains very important and as valid as ever. The second story that comes from the impact study is that of the healing power that is now associated with the fog water. When extended family members visit, everyone is known to fill a 5-liter fog water bottle to take with them. If suffering from bloating or stomachache, fog water recipients are quick to prescribe a good fog water glass. Now it is believed to possess some healing qualities, and this again begs the question of how we have gone from believing fog at best a nuisance to holding healing powers. This process of transformation is radical. But when making tea, an essential ritual of the day and part of the identity of being an Amazigh, a Berber, fog water is deemed to be the best. The fact of being pure with no minerals in it, salts gives the tea a uniquely pronounced taste. With this, we have completed an entire circle from aversion to celebration. The women speak about the water also as a benediction, a rahmah, which has erased the long list of grievances they used to ascribe to fog. Previously, and when fog would stay for some 3 days, that is previously to celebrating fog, an old game played by the village women would be performed to call for a change. Two opposing groups, one representing the sun and one fog, they'd be performing a fight, and how the sun, represented in the form of a gourd, would overpower fog and symbolically swallow it in its belly. Now the women joked the gourd has to return against itself and vomit back the fog, so it stays and be celebrated as the water source it has morphed into. An inversion of the game that once performed was believed to free them from the heaviness and insidiousness, the presence of fog. I'll just give you the technology. Fog collection is a very ancient technique. From mounds of rock stocked to condense and cool fog, to putting or building containers under large tree foliage, fog collection is known and practiced way of harvesting water. The Canary Islands is the case to have brought fame, as the 16th century Spanish traveler through the island recorded the famous Tree of Life, which was used as the major water source by the Guanchos, the indigenous communities, inhabitants of the islands prior to their decimation at the hands of the Spanish. Then in modern history, and I'm looking for some of these pictures, and then in modern history, fog becomes an object of fundamental research in Namibia, where some of the first experiments were conducted by the end of the 1960s through the 70s. The fully fledged project was built in the 1980s in Chile under the supervision of what became later FogQuest, a Canadian-based NGO directed by Dr. Robert Schemenauer. Other projects, experiments, were then built around the planet, but they are all very small scale and demanding constant maintenance of the fog collectors. The fog collectors come in two sizes, 12 square meters or 40 square meters, and the highest yield is 11 liters of water per square meter. Comes from Oman. However, the fog collectors are not ideal for high wind sites as in our projects in Morocco. And here I'd like to go back. So these are the fog collectors, and this is some of the nets that were torn when we needed to change them because they demanded just a lot of maintenance. So this is one type of the fog collectors, and these are the new ones. Following excuse me. Yes. The technology has moved from the Rachel mesh, which is this one right here. This one is called the Rachel mesh, to this one here, which is the 3D. The technology has moved from the use of the Rachel mesh to now very sophisticated 3D structure, and with a robust engineering capable of withstanding up to 120 kilometers of wind per hour, as well as extreme fluctuations in temperature. With the new observation nets we have recently built, we are at 33 liters per 1 square meter. The cloud fishers, these units that you see here, are designed by our partner, engineer Peter Trautwein, a very active member of the Munich Water Foundation, which allies sound engineering, elegance, and high efficiency. And so with this new form of nets, we have simply multiplied water yield by tenfold. As an NGO director, I think there is great potential in this move, as we'll have increased amount of water with less expenses and labor. But as a person who is opposed to intensification of modes of production, there is a tale of caution here in how to remain focused on scale and needs. There are certainly drivers for more RD, research and development, and expansion for fog collection as an additional research venue on alternative water sources in a contemporary world concerned about its water future and clean water sources. But there is concern that fog might simply become just yet another commodity. At least at this time, and among the fog community, there is a very strong ethical stand against commercialization of fog water, perhaps to the exception of a vodka called Hanger One out of California, whose d'ailleurs proceeds go back to NGOs. And the chances this shared value remain a guiding principle is very strong and is dictated in part by the scale, type, place of the FOG collective initiatives. All such initiatives can only be small, even when they may have 1,000 square meters of nets. They may even be thought of as a sort of forerunner as they align themselves with different paradigms for resource management that is holding part of the answer to major planning for urban future, i.e. how to break away from centralized management of large cities into smaller units, each managed with a socially and locally grounded regime of control so that there be no overexploitation or the capitalist logic of increase and intensification for profit with total disregard to environmental equilibrium. As long as this technology functions as a passive system, that is the wind gently pushing fog into the nets, and not some active system siphoning fog at a greater speed and yield, this remains an ethically grounded technology, one in which the social puts the natural to use in ways that are, at least not destructive, and at best respecting and respectful of an out-of-the-norm resource. As a conclusion, what does it mean to drink fog water, or get drunk on Hanger One vodka, or use fog water to mix whitewash paint for the cemetery wall, or bathe the newborn baby in fog water? All these small, systematic, at times arbitrary, everyday gestures in which water use is essential to the making of the action itself are rarely questioned. We use water, but rarely, if ever, question its source, and for that matter, much of the sources that feed us in this age of the Anthropocene. Perhaps too much of an idealist, but I think that a post-humanist ethics, starting with that which nurtures us as a species from air, water, food, and spirituality, these entanglements with and within the world need be our motto. There is a constant immersion and in between the immaterial and the lived reality of culture. In fact, culture is an adaptation of and by those forces we call nature. How this being we inhabit is a sutured nature, culture, nature, to which sources like fog can help us connect to, help us walk toward a greater awareness and more ethically grounded initiatives. Thank you. And I want to continue some of the questions.
Thank you very much, Jamila, for this wonderful presentation. So we'll take some questions from the audience, if there are any.
Well, this is the new project, yes? Oh, this is the film. Can I show the film? It's
Sure.
a minute. Sorry. This is what we call the sea fog. That is, it's, well, I can't remember. It acts like a sea, and so there's just fog all over the place. That's it. Yes.
You said that it's better to collect not necessarily the sea fog, but the fog that comes in the valley, that goes into valleys. Did I understand that correctly?
That's where it sits. It all comes from the sea, and it sits by. It comes to the mountainside where there is an elevation that blocks it and doesn't let it dissipate. But it's one type of fog when it moves through a corridor that it has to be trapped in a certain place. That's where it's collected.
Yes, yes. Well, when I was there at Dar Si Hmad, I remember that it was very amazing because, first of all, I mean, it is very true that in those remote communities, very often it's women that go and catch water, and sometimes they take many hours per day to go to those places. So it was really amazing to be there and also participate with Leslie Dodson that did the educational program for women, because that's exactly when you bring water to those villages, you really free a lot of time for women that otherwise would be busy on trying to provide water for the household. So suddenly they have free time. And in this free time, there are the educational workshops and being conducted where, as I witnessed when I was there, women in their, I don't know how old were they, but in their 50s or 60s, they were learning to read and write. For example, that's one of the activity. So I think it's really important to, as you were saying about sources of water, I mean, we are in a privileged place where we have many sources of water, so we don't have to think where it actually comes from, because we open the tap and that's the substance comes from. However, when you have to physically actually go somewhere and carry it, plus the weight of it, it becomes completely a different substance as well. So bringing this water from fog, and I'm very happy you said, I think that's kind of the danger, and that's why we here all together also rethinking about our relationship to the environment in a different way, and the whole relationship, as Veronica was talking this morning, to human and non-human relationships. But we have, I think it's important to think that we don't have to find solutions that are global. So there's no such a thing as mono solutions, and I think that's exactly what you mentioned. So collecting water on fog, it's not necessarily a technology that can be applied everywhere, and we don't have to find solutions that are applicable everywhere. I think it's very important to think about locality and what, which also kind of brings to my mind the little exchange we had over lunches, sort of the idea of the connectedness to a place. And I think as we were talking all the different indigenous cultures, there is a deep connection to a place. So this removedness that we have today of not knowing the source of water and sort of not necessarily being connected to processes or to the places, we create a different nature, culture. And here it is very local, and I think exactly as you were saying, there is a danger that it might become a kind of used technology on a large scale, but I think what you are doing and the NGO Dar Si Hmad, it's really amazing because it is very placed locally and it brings those solutions. And of course the changes that it creates, as you were saying, from something that is being that people were afraid of or didn't had very, very negative connotations to something that is very, very positive.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bargach. I have sort of two questions. One is, when we talk about the local responses, do you need a big NGO to come in and do this, or is this a technology that small local communities could develop themselves without outside support? That's one question. The second question was, with the educational empowerment of women and girls coming very rapidly in a 10-year period, has there been any backlash or social tension as a result of that rapid change?
I'll start with the second question. A lot of at this moment in the history of the country, there is a sense in which cooperatives and the independence of women, the economic independence of women, economic independence is something that's very positive. And so the education, some of the workshops we did of education for the women were sort of funneled and interpreted within these folds. So they weren't deemed necessarily as aggressive or subversive to the local culture. Of course, you always have the one person or two people say, no, we won't send our girls to school, or no, we don't need this information or this training. But there still remain, in a large population of about 1,000 people, really the low keys or the lower voices, just because there is so much also really material poverty, and people are trying to reunite their families. The villages, most of the villages are inhabited by the women. There are some men, but not that many. And so the fact of trying to make the family life survive, and the culture and the language, which is another dimension I didn't speak about in the paper, it takes the men to go away to send the money and remittances. It's an economy that lives on remittances and very little local production. And those patterns are breaking up families and breaking up kingship patterns that are very, very strong, used to be very strong and ancestral. So in a way, seeing the women to be a little productive and being self-sufficient by the men, by the women themselves, is a positive, has, at least at this time, still seen as a positive step. Perhaps in the near future, I don't know, things may change, this is about the flux, fog comes and goes. Now, for the first question, I think that when I personally started working and getting involved in these projects, I knew zilch nothing about fog, walu, nothing. I had to witness a fog event on top of the mountain, and I always think about this as a moment of kind of revelation to the natural connection with these elements, but then with the world, with nature, the suturing of culture and nature. And then I started reading and understanding what fog is, and then discovered that there is, the technology has always been small scale and local. And there are lots of instances throughout the planet, even in the Atacama Desert, where it is not known to have ever rained, people only use fog. The Guanchos, in the Canary Islands, especially in an island, not the Tenerife, in one of the islands, now its name escapes me, the only source of water is fog. And so the technology has always been there, but it has been small scale for the use of the needs that the communities need, for the animal drinking or for their own drinking. But then, in modern times, thinking about always increasing the production and making it standardized has been a concern for a lot of scientists and a lot of people working in the climate arena. And so that came in the 70s. In the 80s, it was all over the planet. All over the planet, in the places where there is fog. And for sure, people can still use little amounts of water, put mounds of rock, and then have a little hole, and then have water, and then the animals would come and drink it. But if we want to just put a one scale larger, we need to have the technology. And the technology has a limited time span, the way it has been practiced so far. But the new technology that was created by this engineer, who is a friend we work with, is very solid, but it is very expensive. And no one can, somebody in Nepal cannot write and call Peter, can you send us a cloud fisher? That would be just, at this time, very impossible. So there's always this mediation force of a civil society actors that comes and is a sort of broker, because we offer a knowledge, and I'm also part of this community. So it's like there is also a connection for me to the community. It's for sure, I occupy this space of mediator and a person in between, but I'm also part of it, so it's hard for me to totally disconnect myself from my world. And one of the lessons that, for me, this last incident happened, which was disaster in the village of not having water, that now there is this responsibility of not ever cutting water from fog, because it's the only source there is. There's no other source. And fog only comes 5 months out of the year. So that means we have to store more water. So that means we have to burn more cisterns. That means we have to raise more money. And so, again, we're into this frantic increase more and more. And then, no, we have to think about this differently. We have to really, not that I have answers and I say this, there's a lot of questions in my paper. Because this is something that there is no blueprint. We're making this as we go along. And I hope that, meetings like this actually help frame the right questions. And if we have the right questions, then we can approach this in a very responsible way. And we cannot fall into this pattern of thinking of commercialization, more water, we can use it for beauty products, we can use it for vodka, we can use it for cars, we can use it for, baby bumps because it doesn't have any salt, it doesn't hurt. There's all these possibilities. But at least at this time, the folks who work in the fog projects, it's always for consumption, only for consumption. And it also makes it impossible to have it otherwise because of the scale of it. So the technology is necessary because it extends at least the use, and it guarantees that you have water at least for 4 years or 5 years, the lifespan of the nets. That was a very long, convoluted answer, sorry.
Anybody else a question?
Yeah, there's somebody over there.
Just a simple question. Okay. D'où ils viennent, les filets? Ils sont produits par qui?
Les filets, pour le moment, ils sont produits en Allemagne par une association qui s'appelle Wasserstiftung, the Water Foundation, à Munich. If you type in the internet Aqualonius, it will come up.